So visiting my father-in-law is what got me really interested in learning more about barbecue. We would go over to his house and he would often be, bragging about his barbecue, talking about how his ribs had been on the smoker for 6 or 7 hours. And I have to admit, his ribs were the best that I had ever had. They were fall off the bone tender, and I had never really experienced that. Definitely better than anything that I had ever had at someone else's barbecue or in a restaurant. And I thought to myself, wow, he talks about it with such passion, especially when his nephew would come over, and he was also really into barbecue, and they would just chop it up, talking about how long they let these ribs sit in the smoker and just how, tender the barbecue was, the ribs. So that really got me interested in learning about barbecue. So if you go to anyone's barbecue YouTube channel, everyone has videos, at least one video and probably multiple videos on how they make ribs. One of the fundamental questions that you have to decide is whether to wrap or unwrap, leave your ribs unwrapped. I know that from wrapping your ribs, that's kind of like a crutch or a shortcut to help them get really tender. So if you're looking for fall off the bone ribs, you're probably going to wrap them after a certain amount of time. The other philosophy is, let them stay on the smoker unwrapped, let that meat naturally pull away from the bone. So I haven't made up my mind which is best. I'm also going to be using what I think is, probably been my favorite rub to use for ribs, which is Hogs and Heat mild and savory barbecue rub. So I'm going to try to keep the smoker between 225 and 275, so that gives me a pretty good range where I don't have to really worry too much. Should be pretty easy to maintain, basically, is what I'm trying to say on the LSG. Another one of those things you keep hearing about with ribs is the 3-2-1 method. 3 hours unsmoked, 2 hours wrapped, then 1 hour unwrapped again to kind of firm them up. I haven't fully decided for the wrapped ribs how I'm gonna go about this. I think I'm gonna probably start checking how the bark is forming after 2 hours and then figure out if that's a good point to wrap. So it'll probably be after 2 or 3 hours when I go to wrap the ribs. And then when I do wrap them, I think I'm gonna keep them wrapped for 1 hour. And then, I'm not even gonna bother with that last potential step of having them unwrapped for 1 more hour to kind of firm them up. All right, guys, we're about 2 hours into the cook, so I'm going to check on the ribs for the first time. Definitely like the color, already starting to get some pullback on some of those ribs there and on the back end. Alright, yeah, the bark hasn't quite completely formed, so I think we're going to leave this on the smoker for another hour before I think about wrapping one of these slabs of ribs. Alright guys, we're 3 hours into the cook, so I want to take another look here. Let's see what kind of progress we have. So definitely on the rack here in the front, the bark looks pretty set. Now the one on the back, yeah, it's still not quite as set in the back. I really like the way the one in the front looks, and the fact that the bark has already set. And I've kind of had it in my mind that the one in the back is the one that I want to wrap. Just trying to decide if I should wrap before the bark has set, knowing that wrapping is going to make everything, you know, make that meat a lot more tender. So, and this is part of what I find a dilemma, especially when you do follow like the 3-2-1 method, where, you know, everyone's just saying, you know, after 3 hours you should just pull your ribs and wrap them no matter what. I don't think I want to do that. I think I want to give those ribs in the back, maybe I'll let them go for maybe another 30 minutes or so, see how things look. Also, I should mention, I'm not doing any spritzing, you know, no spritzing with water or juice or anything. I really just want to taste the ribs with the rub that I'm using to really give me an accurate place to do a comparison between the two. All right, barbecue family, so I feel like the crust has set now. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap these ribs. They've been on the smoker for 4 hours, and my temperature on the smoker has been between 240, 250 on average. Okay guys, so I've let the wrapped ribs rest. And as is usually the case, right on cue, Janine has appeared. She made it home, so she's right on time to give these a try. All right, so definitely, I think it's definitely tender.
Yeah.
Comes off the bone really clean.
Yeah, I agree.
With hardly any tug.
There's a really nice flavor to it. Alright, I'm going after number 2. I think my eyes are bigger than my stomach.
So I know that, you know, Janine is very sensitive to spiciness and salt. So again, I picked this rub. I think the Hogs and Heat mild and savory rub is a pretty, you know, I think it's pretty neutral.
Yeah, it's good. It's not salty. It's not too spicy. It's just, it's bringing a good flavor for me.
So we'll come back later. The unwrapped ribs are still on the smoker. All right, guys, these ribs have been on the smoker for 7 hours. So I want to check and see if they are done. So there's the bend test. This pretty much tells me that these are ready to come off, because they are basically gonna break apart if I pick them up with the tongs. So again, I let these stay on for 7 hours. Probably could have got it done, you know, 6 hours, 30 minutes. Granted, you know, I've been opening and closing the grill numerous times, you know, checking on the other ribs and whatnot. So, you know, probably didn't need the whole 7 hours to get them to this point. But I've got no complaints. I enjoy the process. Try to film myself trying this rib. Hold on. Okay, now that's a good rib, guys. Very tender. This also comes right off the bone. From an appearance standpoint, I knew that I would prefer the unwrapped ribs because I'm just kind of used to what a rib should look like from a competition perspective. For tenderness, again, I think these ribs probably stayed on the smoker maybe an hour longer than they needed to, but they are really tender. I actually think that my family will also like the tenderness on these ribs. I know I think I prefer, from a tenderness perspective, I prefer the Unwrapped. And then also from a flavor perspective, I think the flavor of the bark is more prominent on the Unwrapped version of these ribs. So I like the Unwrapped better. Now, trying to predict my family, I think my daughter might actually like this Unwrapped version better too, because her one comment was she loved the tenderness of the wrapped ribs and she loved the flavor, but she thought it could use a little more punch, a little more spice. And I think you get that extra punch, a little more flavor from the bark on the Unwrapped rib. Well, I think my wife, who, is the daughter of the fall off the bone, tender making rib king, her father, I think she's gonna prefer the rib that was wrapped, for both the tenderness perspective as well as because the flavor is more subtle, a little milder. So that's my prediction. All right, guys, so I'm going to try and make this short and sweet. But basically, both my daughter and wife, my predictions were pretty spot on. My daughter liked the Unwrapped version because you could taste, more of the flavor, more punchiness, more of the flavor from the bark. My wife actually voted it a tie, and she commented on, the tenderness of the wrapped ribs and then the more punchy flavor of the Unwrapped. I think I'm going to lean towards not wrapping, but if I know that my audience or my, the folks that I'm cooking for are really looking for that fall off the bone tenderness, then that's probably what I'll try to give them, and I'll go with the wrapped version. So what do you guys prefer? What do you think works best for you? Please leave your comments. Let me know your thoughts. Again, if you like what's happening here on my channel, please subscribe. I appreciate the support. This is Kenyatta Robinson. Thanks again for joining me on my Backyard SmokeMaster Barbecue channel. I'll see you in the next one.